Hello, everyone. In this podcast, we will be discussing sensitive topics such as sexual assault. It's important to take care of yourself while listening. Some suggestions are listening while you're in a healthy headspace or knowing who you can reach out to if you become upset. Our 24/7 helpline for crisis calls based out of Central Florida is 407-500-HEAL. By contacting the national hotline at 1-800-656-4673, you can get support and learn about your local resources. There's always someone ready to help. Welcome to the Victim Service Center podcast. Here we sit down with professionals that serve survivors and victims of trauma or those who've experienced violence and have conversations about social issues. This week, we are talking about poverty and trauma. My name is Emilie Mitchell. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the education coordinator at the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. With me today, I have Paola Kalb. Paola uses she, her pronouns and is the Victim Compensation Specialist at the Victim Service Center. She is also starting her MSW program at UCF in August. She is focused on the intersectionality of poverty and trauma and is passionate about social justice. So Paola, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Emilie, for inviting me. I'm really excited to be a part of this podcast today.
Absolutely. And I'm also really excited to have two amazing individuals from UP to join us today. So starting off, I also have Pamela Rivera. So Pamela uses she, her pronouns and joined UP Orlando as programs director in 2021. She holds a master's degree in human services and is a certified child welfare case manager. Mrs. Rivera oversees crisis stabilization, emergency food pantry, workforce development, and education initiatives. She has over 20 years of experience in human services while working with diverse populations. Her passions include helping clients overcome adversity through strength-based approaches that empower them to make positive life choices to reach their full potential. So Pamela, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here as well.
And finally, we have Jay Silvagnoli. Jay uses she, her pronouns and joined United Against Poverty in August of 2019 as the intake coordinator. In 2021, she was promoted to crisis navigator, and in 2022 to her current position as crisis stabilization manager. She has an AS in information technology, a BS in health sciences, and is currently acquiring a master's degree in nonprofit management and public administration. Jay oversees the intake process and crisis navigation at the Life Enrichment Center of UAP by providing wraparound services and referrals for participants in need. So Jay, thank you as well for joining us onto the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to have this really important discussion today. Just as a very brief introduction, today we are lucky enough to have United Against Poverty, as well as Paola from VSC to join us to talk about how poverty can not only impact a survivor of trauma, but also be a source of trauma, dispel some myths about poverty, the challenges people in poverty face, how resources like UP and UAP can help, and ways we can all be better supporters. So with that, to start off, can you tell me a little bit about United Against Poverty and the work that you all do?
Sure. United Against Poverty is also known as UP Orlando. And our mission is to help those clients or families that are struggling, lift them out of poverty and get them to self-sufficiency. And we do that by providing a range of different services, like a holistic approach We have the Crisis Stabilization Manager that can do case management, again, link them to outside resources. We have a Workforce Development Specialist where we actually instruct on emotional intelligence, because we know emotional intelligence is key, right, to understanding how to get along in the workplace, help with conflict resolution. And then we also help them link them to immediate job openings. Then we also have our grocery center program, and that is a free membership. And that also offers low cost groceries, and they can come in and purchase 7 days a week if they need to. And if they have an EBT card, they're more than welcome to come and use their card in our grocery center as well. Then we also have our education initiatives, which comes in different forms, different workshops. So we have a senior safety workshop coming up. Then we're also registering for GED classes and courses, the prep courses, again, helping them reestablish their educational goals and try and get them to where they need to be. Then we also have an emergency food pantry that we have the clients access that only once a year. And that's really because we don't want to create a dependency, right? We want to give them the tools to be able to purchase food via a new job or higher wages, whatever they need to get to that point of self-sufficiency. And Jay, I'll let you continue.
Sure. Also in the Life Enrichment Center, what we focus on is helping participants that come and visit us with just the normal little things of life. For example, we have many participants that need help with filling out food stamp applications, or having to complete an unemployment application. In addition, some don't have internet access at home, so they come here and we let them utilize our computer lab, our phones. Sometimes we run into those individuals that don't have phone access, so we provide them with that as well. We also connect them with a whole bunch of resources, either in-house or off-site. In-house, we have different providers that come here on different dates. For example, Primary Care Access Network is here on certain days. We also have the multicultural wellness individuals here as well. We also, during different periods of time when it's tax season, we have VITA. So it's tax assistance for those individuals who just don't know how to do their taxes. So it's an array of different wraparound services that we provide. We help faxing and making copies, just those little things that some individuals are not able to do on their own. And everything here is at no cost. So, yeah.
That's incredible. Thank you both so much for explaining that and all the amazing work that you all do. It's so many different facets that you're kind of supporting from education to job applications to taxes to all those different things. I can only imagine that you're coming at it from, of course, a reactive approach in the sense that when people need help, but also from like a preventative approach as well, from what I'm hearing, in the sense to kind of empower individuals. And up makes a lot of sense, as if like they're being lifted up into, a thriving kind of atmosphere. It sounds like these programs maybe stem from different, because no two cases are the same, no two clients are the same. Is that kind of how these programs come about, where you're kind of hearing the needs of the community and then, oh, it sounds like we need kind of this resource in addition as you have grown as an organization?
Absolutely. During the pandemic, the initial phases of the pandemic, we were one of the few agencies that was still open. And, we had all those issues that were happening with people being let go from work and needing to file unemployment, claims, not only claims, but applications. And we had to learn how to work with the new system that had been placed. So we had to learn all that. So yeah, a lot of the things that we do, it's by phases. We learn by phases. We learn it all, and then we try and help the individuals. Same thing, the stimulus, when that was happening, we did not know anything about how do you file for a stimulus for certain individuals that don't have it, we're not working. So we had to learn that too. Then there was the ID me piece put in place, and we had to learn how to do the whole ID me in order to help our individuals that come and visit us. So yes, it changes every day. Every day it's different.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for providing such detail about the amazing services that you provide for free to the community. And I know, Paola, we didn't put this on the questions, but I know that you have some experience in the past working with this population. Do you want to talk like a little bit about that?
Sure. So I come from a background in working as a targeted case manager for Medicaid, and then I also worked with people experiencing homelessness. I work with an organization in Osceola County, which experiences a high volume of homelessness, and there are very few resources and accessibility to programs. So I was an outreach specialist there, kind of going and talking to people and trying to connect them with the resources that we had available to us. I also weekly helped out at the agency's food distribution program during COVID. And then as a target case manager, that was a lot of providing referrals and resources and wraparound services, just making sure that everybody was getting connected. And because it was folks on Medicaid, it was people experiencing poverty, or who were diagnosed with a disability. And so they were living off of Social Security disability. And so it was a lot of like trying to be creative about what resources were out there, about what programs would kind of connect with self-sufficiency, but also meeting that immediate need that the client may have had. So that was really cool, because I learned a lot of different resources in the community, but it was also really hard, especially when it came to like the medical requirements or the mental health requirements, because oftentimes what I was seeing was people getting re-traumatized because they had so much stress and anxiety because they couldn't pay this medical bill, they couldn't pay that medical bill. And it was just very overwhelming, because not only were they dealing with the initial diagnosis, but then they were dealing with, how do I pay for the treatment that I need for this diagnosis?
Wow. Thank you for shedding light on that. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of highlight to see why, this particular topic is passionate for you. So that's why I wanted to kind of give that little overview. So thank you. And I think that it's a good segue into kind of defining exactly what is poverty, what constitutes poverty, and then in the US, what is the poverty line in Orlando and things like that.
I would define poverty as not being able to meet your basic needs. Food, that could be food, shelter, whatever it is that you need to get by, and not as a consequence of poverty. I know I was reading some statistics, and specifically in Orlando, the poverty rate in 2017 was actually 13.2%, which is still very high. However, 2022, we're looking at 19.1%, and that's a substantial jump. We're seeing it every day. More and more clients are coming in, the whole COVID thing, lack of employment, need higher wages, food scarcity, all those things, and we're seeing it in the data. So that's why with our programs, we're hoping to kind of stifle that statistic and provide those wraparound services to get these clients out on their own.
Wow, that's so heartbreaking to hear, Pamela. Thanks for pulling those statistics for us. I think that it's really telling to see how different events that occur around us affect poverty and those who are facing poverty. And I also wanted to ask, what are the different forms of poverty? You mentioned something about, the definition being around, not being able to meet specific needs and means to survive. But are there different forms of it?
I would say there are. I mean, for everybody, the situation is different. You have those individuals who are working, right? But they're not making enough money. They're just not making enough. They have a job, they work 40 hours, but it's still not enough. So those the ones that are living paycheck to paycheck, right? Then we have the other ones who are just completely homeless. They're living in shelters, they're living in the street, they're living in their cars. And it could be, an individual, or it could be an entire family. I mean, we see that a lot. And then there are other individuals that just things happen all of a sudden that they weren't expecting. They were living a normal life, and then all of a sudden something happens. Their house, there's a fire and their house goes up in flames, and they lost everything. So yeah, you can look at so many different scenarios, and we see those day by day.
I'm just going to jump in there really fast and kind of elaborate on what you were saying, Jay, about the sometimes, something just happens and that throws someone into poverty. I see that a lot in my position as the victim compensation specialist. Sometimes people are, survivors of a violent crime, be it sexual assault or gun violence or a hit and run accident. And they have mountains of medical bills now that they have to pay, or they went into credit card debt in order to try to move to get away from the perpetrator. Or in domestic violence situations, somebody leaves the DV situation and now they're without another financial support. So I think that's very important to kind of look at as well when we're looking at what influences poverty, because it's not just an individual's own decisions, which is what everybody seems to think about poverty being, but there are a lot of external factors as well. And there are a lot of things that are kind of outside of one's control, especially when we look at crime and survivors of crime, because there is this notion that if you've made it, you've made it. Nothing can, hurt you or harm you or anything like that. But that's not always the case. Like, you never know what's going to happen in life. And, there have been people that I've worked with that have been in comfortable upper middle class positions, and now they're struggling to make ends meet because they're paying rent all by themselves because they had to leave a domestic violence situation. And this is why wraparound services are so important, and awareness is so important, because it doesn't impact just one type of person or one community. It's intersectional.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, Paola, as well, because that is such a good reminder that how complicated this, can be, and how you're already kind of addressing some of the myths that we're going to get to about this as well. But I appreciate you bringing up, survivors of abuse and trauma and how that can impact their financial means. Absolutely. Which I think I'd like to also pause here. And we've done this a lot where we've defined what trauma is, but it's very a difficult definition to grasp. So for the sake of this conversation, I wanted to, ask you all, how would you define trauma and poverty? Can poverty be traumatic?
I think that trauma it's an emotional response to something that has happened in their life. It could be involving domestic violence. It could be a sexual assault. It could be anything that has affected them in their mental health. And I think poverty can also be part of that. Growing up and never having enough food on the table, that has to stay in your brain for a long time. Growing up in a domestic violence home, seeing the treatment of your mother or your father, that sticks with you. Like they say, trauma is imprinted on your brain. It stays, it does not leave. And that's why it's so critical to address that trauma early on so they don't repeat it, right? Growing up, they're having kids and all around. That's why we're able to, again, going back to the wraparound holistic approach to try and address those traumas.
Yeah, just again, about the poverty being traumatic. If you're not able to kind of access care for things that you need or access resources, you're kind of left in a learned helplessness. And that can be really hard to then learn how to feel empowered and take control of situations, because trauma can already leave you feeling helpless and hopeless. And then when you do try to access a resource like medical assistance and you're told that, well, you can't get that help because you can't afford it, that is re-traumatizing because it's putting you back in that position of the learned helplessness of like, there's nothing I can do to change this situation.
Yeah, kind of like this vulnerability, right? And we talk a
Absolutely.
lot about survivors of trauma and how, giving back, power and empowerment is so integral or can be for healing. So I can see how different, being denied different things and feeling that helplessness absolutely can heighten that. And also like just thinking about, the scientific background of responses to trauma, right? So trauma is our bodies trying to protect ourselves from threats, going into a survival mode of fight, flight, or freeze or fawn. And poverty seeming to be this, kind of a survival mode for an individual. It makes sense that it would also release the common hormones that trauma does, right? Cortisol and all those things like that. So it does absolutely make sense that poverty itself can be traumatic. And then there could be certain triggers that come along with it as a person is trying to heal from it, it's trying to, move forward. So it makes a lot of sense how these two things kind of come together. Just a couple of other definitions that I wanted to kind of start off here. What exactly do we mean by like child welfare? What is child welfare?
So child welfare is, it's how we in the system can protect children by providing the families or the parents an array of different services, because we're looking for a behavior change. A lot of our children that are sheltered or removed and placed in foster care, the parent has abused, neglected, or abandoned them. And instead of just giving them a case plan and a check off, hey, you completed it, we've extended that to being able to see behavioral change. So if it was mom has bipolar or something like that, we want to make sure that you're going to the doctor, you're on your medications, we want to get recommendations from the doctor. It's not so much just a checkoff. We need to see a behavioral change so that we can feel comfortable with reunification and that child is going to be safe in that home. So it has been extended, but it's that whole, again, back to the wraparound and holistic service. It's not for the child that's in care, but for the family as a whole.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The whole unit kind of coming together to help support. Absolutely. And then the last kind of thing that I wanted to discuss as far as defining is I've heard this term called the school to prison pipeline. So does anyone want to kind of take a stab at what that can mean?
Yeah, I can go ahead and touch base on that. And if anybody has anything to add, like, please feel free to. But the school to prison pipeline is essentially this concept that young kids are, it's by third grade, dependent on reading level, people can determine whether or not like the chance of them going to prison, what that is going to be. So it's essentially this concept that in some situations, because of lack of access, lack of education, lack of social support, lack of connections, lack of mental health access, school-aged children can end up in prison, whether that's in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Kind of varies depending on the situation, but it's this whole concept that there's a direct connection between I hate the term low performing students because that's kind of like locking them in, but there's a correlation between students that are struggling in school and don't have support or access to care, or maybe coming from stressful home situations that is impacting their not just academic performance, but their behavior as well in school. There is a correlation to an expectation to end up within the prison system, whether as a juvenile offender or an adult offender. So that's pretty important and pretty sad because a lot of that is influenced by poverty. Because again, if you're not able to access resources or support, or even good nutrition, because studies are showing that nutrition impacts brain development, which impacts responses in stressful situations, which impacts criminal behavior. that we're seeing this impact that poverty can have on someone's life trajectory.
Thank you so much, Paola. Again, kind of seeing how this system is really complicated and can be impactful from all of these different angles. And I think now I'd like to kind of bust some myths, because I think there's a lot of myths that surround, or misconceptions that surround, poverty in general and how we view it as a society, as the world. So what are some myths that you want to debunk here? I have some kind of listed when we were planning this podcast. And the first one I kind of have is poverty only happens to certain kinds of people. So how would you address that myth?
So like I was saying before, it can happen to anyone. It just depends on life situations. It can happen to anyone. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, I think that that's super important. And I know that we kind of already addressed it, right? Where there's kind of this myth that essentially, some people are protected from it or not. And it seems like that isn't the case. It could affect anyone at any time in their life. There could be certain life circumstances, and now the person is in a situation that they need some assistance with. So I appreciate that. Any other myths that you want to kind of address?
I think as well the myth that if someone is experiencing homelessness, they'll have instant access to housing. This kind of perception that if you are poor or you don't have access to resources, things will just magically be handed to you. That's not true at all. The wait lists are eternal. And there are a lot of documents and proof and support, like supporting situations that need to happen. So for example, in my experience with working with people experiencing homelessness, there's something called permanent supportive housing, which the wait list for that could be years long. And you had to prove that you had a long-term disability, and you had to prove that you were experiencing homelessness for a year or more. And without breaks in homelessness as well. And breaks in homelessness could be defined as spending a week or more under a roof. So if the person was in a hospital for over 7 days, then they weren't experiencing homelessness, even though they went right back to the streets or the camp. If somebody was in prison for 7 days or more, that also counted as a break in homelessness. Or even if somebody then got lucky and was able to stay in a hotel or have some type of shelter for 7 days or more, that counted as a break in homelessness. And that made them all of a sudden ineligible for this type of service. And even with the permanent supportive housing, they still had to pay 30% of the rent. So for a lot of people who were able to get into this program, they then had to find a way to come up with some form of money. It wasn't just a handout. It wasn't just free. It wasn't like they weren't working for it or trying for it or anything, which are a lot of myths kind of surrounding any type of government assistance. These are still people who had pretty disabling conditions who then had to find a way to still pay that 30%, even though it was a reduced fee, they still had to pay something. And so that also was a big factor too. And then as well, when we're looking at Section 8, because a big thing that I was doing with my work as a targeted case manager was helping people apply for Section 8 housing. That wait list was also really, really long, and there was no guarantee that you would get the housing voucher or you would be admitted to public housing, to the Public Housing Authority. And even if you were, it was still dangerous. And there were some people who were survivors of crime who had a lot of trauma, who were concerned about moving into an apartment complex because their apartment had been robbed the last time, or an intruder had broken in and hurt them, assaulted them in some shape, form, or fashion. So there's no kind of like guarantee of protection when you're applying for those type of programs. And that can be really scary for some people.
Would you agree, Pamela and Jay, as far as this kind of misconception that they'll just immediately be able to find housing?
Absolutely. We have on site, we have a coordinated entry system who comes here on Fridays, and they're here from 1:30 to 4. And we see individuals that come in, and all they're doing is they're having an assessment first. And that assessment, what it does, it triggers if they are going to be able to receive some type of assistance in the future. So we do see a lot of individuals that come in and they're thinking, oh, okay, I'm here, I'm going to talk to somebody and I'm going to get housing tonight. And that is not the case. It's just not the case. It's discouraging to see as they leave and are not able to get that type of housing or that type of assistance, excuse me. And yeah, we do see it. So everything that Paola said, I agree with 100%. We do see that. And the other thing that I wanted to bring to the attention is that those that are being helped, right, when they get a case manager assigned to them, most of the time they go into a temporary type of housing situation. It could be at a hotel, most of the times it's at a hotel. And even those hotels are not safe. We've had individuals, clients that have reached that point. Okay, I'm in a hotel now. My next point is trying to get into some type of apartment or home or something like that. But they tell us, it's scary. I'm in this hotel and there's drugs going around. There are shootings. So it's still it's not a safe environment to them. So that's been my experience with clients that come through.
I appreciate you highlighting that, Jay. I think it's important that we can kind of see what a situation realistically can look like for these clients and for individuals that are facing this. And, we talk all the time about how healing from trauma, a sense of safety is integral to start that. And the fact that we're hearing that can take a long time before an individual is even in a space to feel safe, I think is really telling and really important to highlight. I know that we had another myth and we kind of busted it already in Orlando as far as, the poverty line going up to 19% of individuals in Orlando facing poverty. But I think there's a myth that it's not a common thing, right? Especially in a, first world country, right? So what would you say to someone who says, oh, poverty is important to talk about, but not a lot of people, experience poverty? What would you say to them?
I think just bringing up that statistic of the 19.1%, that right there is shocking. I also would probably get a little testy and talk to them about how it's not fair to say that, because even if it is it doesn't matter how many people. It does matter because it's so many people, but even if it was impacting 5%, that's still 5% of the population that is suffering tremendously. And it's, a lot of people say that you can measure society. I don't remember what person it was who said the quote exactly, but you can tell a lot about a society, not how they treat their wealthy, but how they treat those in need. And so even if it's 19.1%, which is horrible, that's really telling, that's a crazy high number. But even if it was 3 or 5%, that's still 3 or 5% of the population that need support, that need help, that are lacking in some shape, form, or fashion. And being in a first world country, like you were talking about, Emilie, that doesn't just instantly mean that we don't have any types of problems.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that, Paola. You're absolutely right. And thinking of that 19.1% again, it's that's 1 in 5. That's 1 in 5 individuals in Orlando that are technically below the poverty line, which I think is just mind-blowing, to be honest.
And just to piggyback on that statement, I wanted to talk about another myth about how some people will just kind of assume that it's the person's fault for being in poverty. I think that is huge. And these types of myths can be really dangerous, and because it's spread, right? It can be spread like a toxin or a poison. And it's important for us as service providers to come and see them at a different angle. So being trauma informed, it's no longer, what happened, why are you like this? It's now, well, what happened to you? So when I hear about people, oh, they're an alcoholic, they're in poverty, it's their own fault. Okay, have you had a discussion with them? Do you know the root cause? Do you have a family history? Have you done anything? What, just because they're, doing this or that? So that can kind of get under my skin because they're not looking at it through a trauma lens. And I get it. Not all of us are trauma informed or, have that type of education, but still, why would we not try and help them or support them and get them to where they need to be? And so that's why I feel blessed that I'm working with Up Orlando, because it's those types of clients that we can really help them make a transformation and get them to where they need to go.
Yeah, thanks so much for bringing that up, Pamela. I think, whenever we talk about any kind of trauma, there can be a sense of victim blaming that comes with it. Just like survivors of sexual violence, we hear all the time, like, well, what were you wearing? It's almost like these two myths kind of, playing off of each other, the sense that only certain individuals experience poverty, that it doesn't affect everyone. And so people almost blame them for, being in the situation that they're in because, oh, well, if I don't do that, then I'm protected from experiencing this, which is just not the case, right? With that, I think that there can also be a myth, and we kind of talked about it a little bit, as far as there's some individuals that are working and they are still experiencing poverty. So what would you say to someone that's like, oh, well, if they could just get a job, they would be fine. They're just not trying hard enough.
I would say to those individuals, sometimes a person does not have let's say the education, right, to get a better job. Sometimes they don't have transportation to get to a better job. And I think that's where we come into play. With our Success Training Employment Program, we try and assist those participants in learning how to obtain a job that's going to benefit them and help them become self-sufficient. Our program is 1 month long. We go through emotional intelligence. We go through financial planning. We go through, actually teaching them how to do an interview. We do mock interviews is what they're called. We also connect them with different partners that are looking for employees, people to employ. And then once we get those individuals employed, then we have a success coach that stays with that person in order to empower them and help them. And that success coach is with them up to 3 years. So we help in that manner. The other things that we do is, for example, we have the individuals that come in and they are ready to work. They have those tools, they have that education, but they're just down on their luck. They have given up. They say, I don't know what else to do. I don't have a good job. I'm making minimum wage. So those individuals, same thing. We have our rapid employment program where we connect them with our workforce development specialist in order for him to help them find the right type of job. So yes, even though a lot of people are working, but they're still working paycheck to paycheck. So programs like ours try to get them out of that paycheck to paycheck in order to be able to become self-sufficient and, have a prosperous life. That's the key. That's why we're here.
I love hearing about how there's that coach 3 years later as well to kind of help with, thriving even beyond the immediate kind of crisis, right? That's probably really integral to getting this person into a stable life full of peace and prosperity, right? So love hearing about that. I think that there, as we were talking about different systems that help individuals, there can also be this fear or idea or myth that people abuse the system. And we're already talking a little bit about all the barriers that people are facing, and we're going to talk a little bit more about those later on in detail. But have you come across this myth that people abuse welfare systems and other social systems that help support individuals experiencing poverty and not meeting their needs?
I think there has been, and that's just, and I go back to another type of poverty, which is generational. It's what's learned at home, right? They grew up on government assistance. This is what I did. This is how you get by. These are all the shortcuts, and it keeps them right there at that poverty level, so they can get the Medicaid, so they can get the food stamps, so they can get this and get that. So I think in that type of situation, they are abusing it. But that's where we like to come in and be like, there's so much more. Let's get you to self-sufficiency. You don't need to depend on the government. It just kind of opens you up to even more goals that you want to make. If we can get you the educational training, then you can buy as much food as you want to, right? Because your income's going to go up. And again, wrapping that up with a piece of mental health, because we know mental health is a big chunk of that as well. So I think we do see some of it. And it's just unfortunate, but the system is so big, and we can't. It'd be impossible for us to pick and choose, or to find out who's abusing it or whatnot. Because some of them really actually do need that crutch for now to get them to the next stop or next point.
Absolutely.
And just to elaborate a little bit, a lot of people believe that food stamps and unemployment and all that is there for the long term. And we try and teach them, no, this is temporary. This is just a temporary solution. Then we run into individuals that say to us things like, well, this is all I've known, like Pamela just mentioned, this is all I've known. And I know I won't be able to go to school, and I know I won't be able to get a degree. And that's where we sit down with them and say to them, well, okay, there are other types of assistance that can help you. For example, I run into clients all the time that have no idea what FOSFI is and don't realize that they may qualify for that help in order to be able to get a degree, and utilize that degree to once again become self-sufficient, to better themselves. So there's the myths that individuals that are not in poverty know of, and then there's the myths of people that are in poverty that also know of, and they depend on it. They think it's that way, and again, we try and do our due diligence in order to teach both sides. No, that, that's a myth, and this is how we can help. Or that's a myth, and this is how you can help. Because at the same time, those individuals, I welcome anybody and everybody that think that poverty is a myth to come and, spend a couple of days with us, volunteer, and just see what we're seeing. Because I think that's the only way that everybody's going to realize what's really going on.
Absolutely. I think that it's super what you're talking about as far as these myths being important to debunk, and how how dangerous they can be, not only for us as a society looking in, but also people experiencing poverty can also have these like internalized myths, right? Kind of this lack of hope that, well, this is how it's always going to be, and things like that. So I think I really appreciate you bringing up this idea that the myths can not only be dangerous in that sense, but also in your own internal monologue as you're facing these things. And I wanted to also talk a little bit about some risk factors as far as what are some characteristics or anything that can put someone at risk that may be more likely to experience poverty.
I would say mental health, definitely. Your family history, if you have disabilities, educational, access to resources. I think if you don't have those adequately, you can also fall to poverty, and it can be situational. Again, like Jay said, you have everything going for you. You have this great 9-to-5 job, and boom, something happens, or COVID happened, right? And then you're out of a job, and then you're calling us. So I think those types of risk factors are very common.
Yeah, absolutely. And Pamela, you mentioned like mental health and ability, like that all ties into intersectionality. And intersectionality is kind of like the way that the identities that you hold play into each other. And so we can see it as well with like ethnic and racial minorities. That can be I don't want to say like a risk factor, but that can intersect with poverty because of the history that this country has and how we have systemically tried to marginalize certain groups with policies. And that then leads into generational poverty, which leads to the school to prison pipeline, which creates this whole cycle of keeping people kind of trapped in poverty, trapped in certain situations. And obviously, that's not to say that happens to everybody, but there is like research shows that there is, significance to this concept of intersectionality, that your identity is going to the identity that you hold, the whatever that may be, whether that is that you are disabled and so you're on social security, a fixed income, so you can't get a job, so you only have access to X amount of funds, whether that is you have a felony conviction, so there are only certain jobs that you can apply for, and there's only certain housing that you can apply for, and that intersects with poverty. Mental health, trauma, this is what we've been talking about. You may have been traumatized from a different situation, and then you feel hopeless and helpless and and unsafe, and as though you're never going to escape from certain situations. Intersectionality in the sense as well as if you've been victimized, that plays a role too, whether you have experienced domestic violence. And obviously, we've seen that women are at higher risk of experiencing domestic violence than men. And so that, your gender identity can hold intersectionality with poverty, as can who you love, like the LGBT plus community, or whether you're transgender or not. All these things play a huge role. And until society kind of becomes more open-minded and realizes how all of these things kind of play together and influence each other, we are going to continue to see a lot of risk factors that may or may not be associated with one group and another group. And that's really unfair, and that's really harmful, which is why it's so important to have resources like United Against Poverty that kind of have wraparound services for everyone and kind of touch base on all of these different things. Like, well, how do you get access to resources? How do you get job development? How can you get safe housing? And important things like the Victim Service Center, like how can you move towards healing? What options are there available to you as you move through your healing journey, so that we can kind of touch upon a lot of different things, not just the presenting problem. Sorry, that was a little bit of a soapbox, so please feel free to jump in.
No, I think that was perfect. I'm glad you brought up the LGBTQ plus community. That was something I was going to hopefully touch on as well, as far as I know that Zebra Coalition here in Orlando specifically works with, I should say, young adults and youth that are in the LGBTQ plus community. Because of their identity, they may experience being kicked out of their homes or things like that. So those just kind of highlighting how there could be different risk factors. And I'm sure there can be, external risk factors as well. I'm hearing that Orlando is going to become, or is, one of the most unaffordable places to live because of the spikes of rental prices, rents and things like that. So again, there's so many different environmental factors like COVID and events. And we also experience a lot of natural disasters here in Orlando. That can also be a risk factor, I think, as well. But so I appreciate you bringing into that intersectionality and also the generational aspect to it that you brought up, Pamela, I think is also really important to bring up too. I know we talked a little bit about how safety is a big integral part to this, and how there can be a lack of safety when individuals are looking for housing and shelter. Anything else you want to bring up as far as how poverty may put people more at risk for violence, including domestic and sexual violence?
Yeah, sometimes people have to live with their perpetrator because they can't afford to live on their own. Sometimes somebody's citizenship status makes them have to continue to live with their perpetrator because they're not going to be able to access other types of support, financial support, because they don't qualify. If you don't have access to finances, give us a lot of freedom. And that's something that we don't really talk about as much. Not just freedom to like buy an Xbox or whatever, but freedom to make your own decisions and freedom to live life the way that you want. And so if you're kind of beholden to somebody else for your finances, that puts you at very high risk for violence.
I agree. And then depends on also what you're making, what you can afford. Then you end up living in an apartment complex or a neighborhood that is unsafe, but this is what I can afford, right? And then your kids could be at risk for issues. You may not be in the best school district, so it could be an issue with their educational. I know I had a family, and I would only go see her at this apartment complex during the day. She even advised, only come during the day. And so I asked her about that, and she's like, because it's not safe. After 5 o'clock, I do not leave my apartment. I have the kids inside, and we were working on trying to get her another, move to another complex where she feels more comfortable. Like she can't even walk outside and walk her kids. So that's huge to me. And then we're leaving these children in this environment where they're scared, and they're supposed to look up to mom for protection, and she's doing what she can do. But again, it falls down to the poverty. So happens.
Thank you for sharing that specific case study there, Pamela. I think that just shed some light on how real that these situations can be, as far as violence and experiencing it. And we talk a lot in our healthy relationships training about, reasons why people may stay in domestic violence situations. I also know that there are individuals that are unable to get a job because of the abuser does not allow them to. Maybe they take away certain documents that are important for employment or anything like that. Take away their transportation, anything like that. So it can be very, very complicated, and I think it's super important to kind of highlight that very real experience that people can be facing. We talked about some barriers already. Any other barriers that you'd like to bring up when it comes to being financially stable and safe that your clients that you've seen have experienced?
Well, yes, with the rent increase right now that everyone is going through, not only people in poverty, but everybody else. That's a big barrier, and it does not seem like it's it's going to improve anytime soon. So we are going to be seeing more and more individuals. We had a program for a period of time where we were assisting individuals with rental assistance, and then, as you all know, also the state was providing through our Florida, and initially it started through the city and then the county, and then it merged into our Florida. But that program has also subsided. So I believe it was as of May 12, I think is when it stopped. And so right now we're going to see a new amount of individuals who are going to be in the same boat right now. So yeah. And then again, you have to think about those who you have to travel from point A to point B, transportation wise, gas prices are super, super high right now. So, all those little things, food prices are up, right? So when you put all of those together, that creates a situation where individuals start going little by little into that paycheck to paycheck, that reaching that federal poverty line. So I would consider those some of the risk factors as well.
Yeah, those are all such great points, Jay. Thanks for bringing that up as far as how everything is kind of increasing. And then also we're seeing I feel like there's this idea, or at least the narratives I'm hearing are, oh, there's jobs out there. Why aren't people getting them? Because as we kind of move into a new phase of the pandemic, I should say, there's a lot of lack of staff, right? But we have to consider the high gas prices going up can be a factor as far as being able to, reliably transport oneself to work and back and things like that. So yeah, I appreciate you highlighting some barriers. I know that there are certain other barriers like criminal background and other things that can become barriers for individuals seeking. And we've also touched on other ones as well. I wanted to ask, as far as UP and United Against Poverty, right? Where do you actually try to start to help your clients thrive?
Well, initially, when they come to our center, they come in and complete some intake paperwork, just some general information, what brings you here today. And then they'll actually meet with the crisis navigator, or Jay, the crisis stabilization manager. And that's where they go over like a self-sufficiency matrix. Let's talk about their priorities, your needs. But then a big thing is we try and come around on a strength-based approach. Tell me some strengths, and some majority of the time it's like, oh, I don't have any strengths. I was like, yes, everyone has strengths. You actually coming through those doors and trying to get help for yourself, that's a huge strength. And they don't think of it like that. So you always have to like flip it around so they can kind of see, aha moment, yes, I do have strengths after all. So with that knowledge, we kind of try and create a service plan. And it could be for 30, 60, 90 days. And it's building on those strengths and barriers. For example, we'll ask them, tell me a time when things are really good. Like, what does that look like? Oh, I had my own house, or I had my apartment, I was working at this job and all this stuff. So you did it once before, right? So we can do it again. We just have to kind of relearn some things. Maybe it's a different environment, it's a different economic picture right now. So just encompassing everything that's happened to them in the past, flipping it and trying to make it more strength-based approach.
I love that. I love hearing you talk about that strengths-based approach. I think that it's just really telling how individuals who are coming in from maybe a feeling of hopelessness and despair may not even see their own strengths within themselves, but places like UP and the VSC being able to kind of reframe that for them so that they can start seeing, oh no, I do have these strengths that can help me and empower them and things like that. So love that you brought that up. What do you think societal changes that can be made? Do you think that could actually help? What are some things that society can do to better make these environments where individuals can thrive and feel safe financially in our society?
I think one of the first things can be a little bit open-minded about poverty and what it means, and not have so much of like a punishment perspective and have more of a trauma-informed perspective. Because once you're able to switch the mindset, then people will be more open-minded to some of these evidence-based practices and solutions that are available in other areas, are available in other countries that have been proven to work. So if we stop kind of punishing people for things that may be out of their control, then we may be able to start to have a society that's a little bit more compassionate, a little bit more understanding, and a little bit more supportive for each other. So that could look like having a little bit more compassion for someone who may have a substance use disorder. And instead of punishing them and putting them in prison for years, helping them get mental health resources so that they can become a contributing member of society, so that they can learn these important social cues, social skills, and be able to participate in the workforce. Having a little bit more compassion for the mom with 5 kids who may be living in a 1-bedroom apartment, and instead of asking her, like, what are you doing wrong, kind of ask her, well, what do you need? What supports are you like in need of? And honestly, like with United Against Poverty, helping create a case plan and find a higher paying job. And that kind of ties into, as well as being more, not compassionate, what's the word I'm looking for? Respectful of people's employment, and not so much being disrespectful towards the food service industry or the service industry in general, because a lot of people, that is their best choice of work, and paying higher wages so that people can afford to live on the paycheck of one job and not living paycheck to paycheck, being able to afford it. And that comes from respecting that type of employment and respecting that type of industry, and seeing its value in society.
I agree. And just to piggyback off of Paola when she brought up the criminal system, we need to reform. A lot of our criminals, they go to jail and they have mental health issues. That's the reason they robbed. That's the reason they did this. They don't look, again, trying to find that root cause because they're not trauma informed. Oh, just throw them in jail. But the other piece is when they get out of jail, right? Mm-hmm. Up Orlando has partnered with with Department of Corrections in a specific arena. And so what we're going to be doing is trying to implement a reentry program. So as soon as they know a discharge date, they are going to be contacting us, coming in for services, again, literally like from head to toe, a holistic approach. Okay, you need housing, employment, they're pretty much starting over. And we feel like if that's a huge service gap. Like, we have to get them there at that immediate juncture, because if we don't, and there's no services for them, they're going to go back to what they know what to do, right? The recidivism rate is 80%. So, and that's extremely too high, that they're going back in because they don't know the skills. They just give up. This is what I need. This is what I've learned to do. This is what I know how to do. I'm good at it sometimes, but they're just going to go back to what feels normal to them. So that's why with UP, we want to be able to offer those immediate services and linkages to get them on the road.
To piggyback now on what Pamela said, I think employers need to try and help those offenders, where they take into consideration, okay, yes, this person, did this, they've served their time, so let's go ahead now and give them the opportunities. Now, there are employers that do, but I think it's a minimal amount. If we could have more employers that could help those individuals, then we won't see that recidivism that Pamela was talking about. Again, that is another barrier. People then go back into the same thing all over again. And that includes poverty once again.
But then also as well, like housing and rent. A lot of people who come out of jail, prison, are not able to live on their own because they don't have any income. So they live with family who, that's against their lease. The landlord kicks the whole family out. Now everybody's being punished. And what I don't understand is, if the purpose of jail, prison, or correction system is for that individual to pay their debt to society, why are they still being punished with poverty when they come out? And why is poverty considered an adequate punishment for life situations?
Yeah, it's not giving people the tools to succeed. It's not giving them a chance. And that's why I love hearing this partnership that you're, that UP is having with different community partners that you brought up, Pamela, because we were talking a lot about wraparound services. And essentially, there's a lot of different needs to be met for someone to thrive, all these different angles, right? Poverty comes in a lot of different ways. And so really community partnerships that are coming together to help individuals be lifted up, right? I think that community partnerships are super integral. So for individuals to thrive in our community and beyond. So with that, I think that that's a great place to kind of sign off. But before I do, is there anything else that you'd like to bring up that we may not have mentioned?
I would like to mention just one thing, because you were talking about partnerships, and just to inform everyone, we as an agency, yes, we do all these things and we try to, help our participants, but we keep a very close relationship with other partners. So I could have a client that I'm working with and 2 other partners are working with that individual as well. And we all come together and we maintain this communication amongst each other just to ensure that that particular individual gets to where they need to be. So I run into many times that a client will come in and I'm talking to them and I will mention something that I've seen that they've done with another partner, and they're like, "How do you know that?" And it's like, because we're all work together, because we're trying to help you. So yes, that's another thing. We all work very close together in order to make everything, well for the individual.
Yeah, so important. What a difference, right, Pamela?
I was just going to say, as far as the community partners, I mean, that's really how we build capacity, right? The capacity to reach even more clients in need, families in need. Partner with employee partners. We have over 80 different partners, community partners, mental health partners, also the faith-based organizations. It's the old saying, it takes a village to raise a child or what have you. Well, it takes a community to uplift everyone, right? Get them up all to prosperity and on that road to self-sufficiency. So, and the only way we can do that is getting buy-in by community members, chambers, all those kind of good people. So, yep.
Thank you, Pamela. And Paola, is there anything that you'd like to say before we sign off as well? Not to put you on the spot, but just in case.
No, I think that everybody kind of touched base on some really important things. And I think as well, like folks having an open mind, really, and patience, and understanding that a lot of things that we've talked about today, like they are influenced by so many different factors. So just getting educated on different risk factors, getting educated on different things. And if you are interested in helping more, reaching out and learning more, and it can start with an email. And I think that that's really important to recognize that it can seem really daunting, but kind of like Pamela was saying, like it takes a community. So if somebody is kind of interested in learning more or helping more, go volunteer, send an email. If you're a head of an organization, see how you can help. Just like how we have a lot of different problems, there are a lot of different solutions.
I love that. And kind of piggybacking off of that too, what you mentioned, Jay, as far as people just coming for a few days to UP, to just see what it's like. I think that could be a huge, growing experience for an individual. And again, different ways that we can resist victim blaming, that we can raise awareness and really come together as a society to help individuals that need it, because everyone deserves to thrive and be safe, right? So with that, I want to thank the listener for listening to the Victim Service Center podcast. The VSC is a nonprofit organization that provides free, confidential counseling services for victims of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. To learn more about our services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear and you are not alone. And thank you so much, Pamela, Jay, and Paola, for joining me today.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
It was a pleasure. We love attending and sharing our mission. So, and also just if any of your listeners are interested in coming to Upper Orlando for a tour, it is open. You just have to give us a call, and then we'll schedule it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.